The wee of the master caution tone sliced through the cockpit hum. Captain Maya Hansen's eyes snapped to the panel. Gear. The indicator for the port main landing gear was red. The other two were green. A hollow thump vibrated through the airframe as the nose and starboard wheels locked into place. Nothing from the left. Warhorse LSO, your port gear is red. The voice in her helmet was flat, professional, but the static hissed with new tension. She recycled the handle. Nothing. The A-10 Warthog, a machine built for abuse, was failing at the one moment it couldn't. Below her, the USS Theodore Roosevelt was a postage stamp of steel in a churning gray ocean. The approaching storm was turning the deck into a slick, pitching nightmare. Stag, Warhorse. I have a hung port gear. Commander Jaskowicz's voice cut in, sharp as broken glass. Warhorse, Stag, divert to NAS. Eject if you have to. I repeat, you are not cleared to land. Do not attempt a landing. She looked at the fuel gauge. She looked at the deck. Divert. Fail the program. Eject. Confirm every doubt they ever had. Her gloved thumb rested on the mic switch. Copy, Stag. Her voice was calm. She left the switch open. I'm coming home. 72 hours earlier, Nas Point, Mugu. The coffee was navy bitter. Maya left the cup untouched. She sat in the back row of the windowless briefing room, an island of Air Force green in a sea of Navy khaki. The air, thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and salt, felt wrong. This was their cage. She was the exhibit. Her USAF flight suit, comfortable and familiar in the skies over Afghanistan, felt stiff here. It clung to her, heavy with the humidity and the weight of 100 scrutinizing glances. They didn't see Captain Hansen, one 200-hour A-10 pilot. They saw the woman, the rookie, the Air Force liaison. Commander Stag Jaskowicz stood at the podium. He was the program lead for Project Mjolnir, a man carved from the same bulkhead steel as the destroyers in the harbor. He moved with the predatory grace of a career FA-18 driver, and his eyes, when they scanned the room, held a deep, abiding skepticism. Project Mjolnir is, by definition, an exercise in absurdity, Stag began. His voice was a low rumble, a sound used to giving orders that were not questioned. We are attempting to mate a plow horse with a thoroughbred. A slide clicked on. A sleek FA-18E Super Hornet next to her A-10 Warthog. The Warthog, her warhorse, looked blunt, ugly, and powerful. Stag used his laser pointer. The Warthog is a marvel, a flying tank, but it was designed to take off from dirt strips, not a $1.5 billion catapult. It is heavy. It is slow. Its GAU-8 Avenger cannon weighs more than a Honda Civic. Its landing gear, he tapped the pointer on the slide, is built to absorb punishment from a runway, not the controlled crash of an arrested landing. Another click. A 3D model of the A-10 with a Iwi bright red X over the nose gear assembly. The Air Force believes this is possible. Our job is to prove why it is not, before we waste an airframe. The room was silent. Maya focused on her breathing. Inhale 4. Hold 4. Exhale 4. The words were a physical pressure, designed to see who would flinch. She would not. Her hands rested on the briefing folder, knuckles white. She had read the KPPs, the key performance parameters. She knew the physics. She also knew the sound of a ground unit being overrun while they waited for air support that was 30 minutes too far away. That sound was the reason she was here. The carrier would cut that time to 3 minutes. The core of this test begins in the new build simulator, Stag continued. It's been calibrated to mimic the catastrophic structural forces we anticipate. We need a baseline, a volunteer. The silence stretched. The Navy pilots studied their notebooks. This was not their aircraft. Failure here was not glorious. It was just data for a report. Maya's hand did not move. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the hum of the ventilation. "I'll take it, sir." Stagg's eyes found her. The laser pointer snapped off. He didn't seem surprised. He seemed resigned. He looked at her not as a pilot, but as a variable he now had to manage. "Captain?" "Hansen, sir. Call sign Warhorse." A single, humorless smile touched his lips. "Fitting." "Very well, Captain. The simulator is yours. Don't break it on the first try." He dismissed the room. The khaki uniforms filed out, a quiet murmur of conversation resuming as they passed the threshold, leaving her alone in the sterile light. Stagg paused at the door, looking back at her. "Hansen," he said. She stood. "Sir." "I read your file. Kandahar. You're a hell of a CAS pilot." His eyes were flat. "But this isn't CAS. This is the boat. The boat doesn't forgive. It doesn't care how good you were over some desert. It just eats." He didn't wait for a reply. He left. Maya stood in the silence, the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant her only company. She picked up the cup, the bitter liquid now cold. She drank it down in one swallow. The boat might eat, but the warthog was built to bite back. The simulator cockpit was a claustrophobic pod, smelling of warm electronics and cleaning solution. It was a bastardized mock-up, an A-10s familiar layout fused with the alien hardware of a carrier. Maya strapped herself in, the 5-point harness cinching down with a familiar tight embrace. But the rest was wrong. In the control booth, visible through a small tinted window, Stagg stood with his arms crossed, a clipboard in hand. A faceless technician sat at the console. "Warhorse, you are set!" The technician's voice crackled in her helmet. "On your mark." Maya's gloved hand moved over the throttle. She performed her checks. Her heart hammered a steady, professional rhythm against her ribs. It's a game. Just a game. She gave the virtual shooter on the screen a salute. "Warhorse, ready!" The world slammed. There was no rumble, no gradual acceleration. It was a 2-second 0 to 150 knot physical blow. The G-force was a mailed fist, crushing her into the seat, stealing her breath. Her head snapped back, and her vision grayed at the edges. The A-10 was built for a slow, powerful lift. Her entire body, trained by thousands of hours, knew the precise moment to ease back on the stick, to feel the air gather under the wide, stubborn wings. The simulator, however, expected a different beast. The nose pitched up violently, her instincts screamed stall, and her hands reacted, pushing the nose down. The screen flashed red. A synthesized voice blared, "Stall, stall, impact." The hydraulics whined and settled. The G-force vanished, leaving her floating against the straps. Stagg's voice was dry, devoid of emotion. "You just drove a $30 million asset into the ocean, Captain. Reset." Heat flooded her face, a furnace of humiliation. Sweat pricked her hairline. It's too responsive. The physics are wrong. It felt less like an A-10 and more like a fighter, twitchy and unforgiving. "Resetting," the tech said. The virtual deck reappeared. The catapult track gleamed. "Don't think. Fly the numbers." She locked her wrist, forcing her muscles to ignore their training. Wait for the positive rate. Don't anticipate. "Warhorse, ready!" The slam came again. She took the hit, her teeth gritted, her neck muscles straining. She focused on the artificial horizon, ignoring the chaotic blue-gray blur of the virtual world. The nose lunged. She corrected. Too much. The aircraft yawed hard to port. She jabbed the right rudder, a land-based correction for a crosswind she wasn't fighting. The overcorrection was fatal. The virtual A-10s snapped. A wingtip caught the virtual water. The screen tumbled, a sickening vortex of red warning panels and the blue-black ocean. The hydraulics pitched her sideways, throwing her hard against the right side of her harness. Crash, crash, simulator offline. Maya slammed her right fist onto the console. The thud of plastic on plastic was flat, pathetic. Silence. The smell of her own sweat filled the small space. It was the acrid smell of failure. She could feel Stagg's gaze through the glass. He didn't need to say a word. His silence was an "I told you so." Get out. Get out now. She tore at the harness release. The latch sprang open. She pushed the helmet off, her hair damp and matted. The recycled air was cool on her skin, but she was burning from the inside. She stood up in the pod, her legs unsteady. Stagg's voice came over the external speaker, echoing in the small room. "We're burning fuel, Captain. Perhaps we should call it a day." Maya gripped the edge of the simulator hatch. Her knuckles were white. She took one ragged breath. Her voice was raw, a low rasp. Again. She pulled the helmet back on, the foam still damp. She sat down. She buckled the harness. Through the glass, she saw Stagg mark his clipboard. He did not look impressed. He looked bored. The visiting officer quarters were sterile, anonymous. The room smelled of industrial-strength carpet shampoo and the faint, salty tang of the sea. Maya stood under a scalding shower, the water pressure a weak imitation of the G-forces that had slammed her, but she let it run until her skin was red. It didn't wash away the feeling, the humiliation, the sensation of tumbling, of failing. She toweled off, the cheap cotton rough against her skin, and pulled on a gray t-shirt and sweats. Outside, a foghorn sounded, a low, mournful call that seemed to seep through the cinder block walls. This place was a fortress of isolation. No familiar faces, no shared misery of a squadron bar, just the cold comfort of a standard-issue room. She sat at the small desk, the chair hard, and opened her laptop. The white light of the screen illuminated her face, stark and tired. She stared at the desktop, at the official Air Force seal. She had failed 6 more times in the simulator. 6 more red screens. 6 more virtual crashes, each one chipping away at her confidence. "The physics are wrong," she'd insisted to the tech, her voice tight. "The numbers are blessed by the engineers, Captain," he'd replied, not unkindly. "It's a different bird on the boat." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The simulator's jarring slam and the sickening tumble had unlocked something, a memory she kept buried under checklists and flight plans. The high-pitched scree of the digital comms, the smell of cordite and hot dust, the darkness over Kandahar, lit only by tracers. Her eyes unfocused. She wasn't in the VOQ. She was at 15,000 feet, her A-10 in a hard bank, the 30mm cannon silent. "Warhorse, Raptor 3, we are being overrun. We are scree, heavy contact, danger close, need immediate static." Her thumb had been numb on the weapon's release. "Raptor 3, Warhorse. I am Winchester. Repeat, I am Winchester. I have no munitions." God, no, they're scree." The radio went silent. Her chest tightened. The same suffocating pressure from the simulator. She'd orbited, useless, a 2 million pound ghost, until her fuel state forced her to RTB. The ground team, Raptor 3, was gone by the time the next air asset, a B-1B from halfway across the country, arrived. Too far, too slow. If she'd been on a carrier 100 miles offshore, this is why. The thought was cold, sharp. This was the penance. This impossible project wasn't for her career. It was for them. She forced her shaking hand to move. She opened a password-protected folder. File, AAR2207 KDR PDF, the after-action report. She scrolled. She found the names. Sergeant Price, A1C Chen, Sergeant Alvarez. 3 names. 3 men who died because her base was too far away. Her breath hitched. The ghost was right here, in the room, its cold hand on her shoulder. You failed them. You'll fail this. She stared at the names until they blurred. No, she would not let this break her. She would let it forge her. Maya closed the file. The abrupt white of the desktop was a relief. Her gaze fell on another icon. Jolnair Physics A-10 Navy .pdf, the technical manual for the carrier modifications. She clicked it. Pages of differential equations, hydraulic fluid dynamics, and stress tolerances filled the screen. She didn't just need to fly it. She needed to understand it. If the sim was right, her instincts were wrong. If the sim was wrong, she had to prove it. She grabbed the stale coffee from her arrival. Let the numbers talk. She began to read, line by line, comparing the sim's stated parameters with the hydraulic schematics of her Warthog. The foghorn cried out again. She didn't hear it. The briefing room was colder this time. The air conditioning cranked high. It smelled of ozone from the servers lining the back wall. Maya stood at the podium, her laptop hooked up to the main display. Stag and 2 civilian engineers, the ones who had blessed the simulator's code, sat at the table. She had requested the meeting. Stag had granted it, his tone suggesting he was humoring her, giving her just enough rope. "Captain," Stag said, his pen tapping an impatient rhythm on his legal pad, "the floor is yours." Maya clicked to her first slide. It wasn't a complaint. It was a data table. "Sirs, I've spent the last 24 hours cross-referencing the simulator's hydraulic modeling with the A-10s technical orders." Her voice was flat, professional. "Let the numbers talk. Don't feel." "There's a discrepancy." She pointed to 2 columns of figures. The sim models a hydraulic pressure curve that assumes a constant pressure, variable displacement pump, consistent with the FA-18's flight control system. The A-10 uses 2 independent variable volume systems. The result, she clicked to a graph, is that the simulator's control surfaces are 40% more responsive than the actual airframe. The lead engineer, a man named Corley, leaned back, crossing his arms. He had a look of profound, paternalistic weariness. "Captain Hansen, we compensated for the A-10's sluggishness. What you're experiencing is the raw physics of a catshot. Your land-based instincts are fighting the profile." The burn of faces staring at her. The familiar dismissal. "You're not used to it. You're the problem." Stag's pen stopped tapping. "What Mr. Corley is saying, Captain, is that this looks a lot like making excuses." There it was, the trap. Maya met Stag's gaze. She held it. She did not flush, did not raise her voice. She simply clicked to her final slide. It was a single line of code she had observed on the tech's monitor during a reset. "With respect, sir, this isn't about my instincts. It's about the data. The sim isn't just fast. It's wrong." She pointed her pen at the screen. "That line of code? That's the hydraulic bleed-off rate for a Hornet. The Warthog system doesn't have a bleed-off like that. It's designed for redundancy and survivability, not agility." She took a breath. "You're not testing an A-10 pilot. You're testing an F-18 pilot in an A-10 skin. That's why I'm crashing. The bird is flying wrong." The silence in the room was absolute. Corley's condescending smile had frozen. He looked at the code, then back at his own notes, his face paling. Stagg stared at the screen. His eyes narrowed, not at her, but at the data. He looked at Corley. "Is she right?" Corley stammered. It's a base-level model. We must have... The assumption was... Is she right?" Stagg's voice was low, dangerous. "Yes," Corley said, the word clipped. The baseline code was ported from the 18 Echo program. Stagg looked back at Maya. The expression on his face was unreadable. It wasn't an apology. It was an assessment. He had set a trap, and she had not only avoided it, she had dismantled it with a technical manual. "Mr. Corley," Stagg said, standing up. "Fix it. Now." He turned to Maya. "Captain, you will be notified when the simulator reflects the correct parameters." He didn't say, "Good job." He didn't say, "Thank you." He just said, "Carry on." As she packed her laptop, she felt the slight, almost imperceptible shift in the room's gravity. She had entered as the rookie. She was leaving as the expert. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't shown emotion. She had just been right. And in this world, that was the only thing that mattered. The A-10, call sign Warhorse 01, felt heavy, sluggish, saturated with JP5. Maya was feet wet, 5 miles astern of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The ocean was a vast, textured sheet of navy blue. The ship, her target, looked impossibly small. "Warhorse Roosevelt, you are cleared for the touch-and-go approach. Runway 29er. Call the ball." The LSO's voice crackled, calm and procedural. "Warhorse copies. Calling the ball." This was not the simulator. The air was not sterile. It was alive. A crosswind buffeted the Warthog's broad wings. The smell of salt and jet fuel was sharp, even in her sealed cockpit. She descended, lining up with the carrier's wake. Her entire focus narrowed. Checklists were done. This was raw stick and rudder flying. The ship grew, resolving from a gray speck into a floating city of steel. Men, tiny dots of color, moved across the deck. 1 mile. The burble. It hit the aircraft like a physical blow. The turbulent, chaotic air spilling over the carrier's island superstructure struck her starboard wing, rolling the A-10 hard to the left. Her corrected sim training took over. Left rudder, not aileron. Power. Don't fight it. Fly through it. She was too high. The meatball, the glowing orange datum of the optical landing system, was a high, angry red. "Warhorse, you're high! Power!" The LSO's voice was sharp, urgent. "Wave off! Wave off!" The words were a spike of ice in her gut, a public failure. "Copy, wave off," she replied, her voice betraying nothing. She jammed the twin throttles forward. The TF-34 engines spooled, a low, protesting roar. She climbed, the deck flashing beneath her wings, a blur of gray and yellow shirts. She had failed the pass. Do not get rattled. Recalibrate. She banked the heavy plane, the turn wide and slow, and slotted back into the approach pattern. You felt the burble. You know where it lives. Anticipate. Her hands were sweating inside her gloves. She wiped her palms on her flight suit. Focus. Fly the plane. She came in again, 3/4 of a mile. She met the burble with rudder, a precise, gentle pressure. The wings dipped, she corrected. She found the meatball. It was centered, green. The deck rushed toward her. This was the moment of controlled crashing. Her land instincts screamed, "Pull up, flare." The LSO's voice was a steady chant in her ear. "Warhorse, call the ball." "Warhorse ball, 3.5, she recited, her eyes locked on the light. "Roger, ball. Keep it coming." The steel deck filled her entire world. The noise was immense. The LSO was silent, trusting her. Thump. The wheels struck the non-skid deck. The impact was a shockwave, vibrating up through the stick, into her bones. It's real. Go, 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 the LSO yelled. She was already moving, throttles to the firewall. The A-10, its hook up, roared down the angled deck. It was a drag race. The end of the runway was rushing at her. Lift. She eased back on the stick. The Warthog obeyed. It leaped off the deck, the ocean yawning below her. She was airborne. Warhorse Roosevelt, good pass. RTB for analysis. Maya banked away from the ship, her heart hammering a wild rhythm against her ribs. She was soaked in sweat. She had just landed a 25,000-pound ground attack jet on a boat and taken off again. It was a success, but it was not the test. The test was not about flying off the deck. It was about being thrown off it. The catapult was next. The deck of the Roosevelt was a sensory assault. The scream of FA-18s taxiing, the sharp smell of steam, and the thrum of the ship's engines vibrated through the soles of her boots. Maya's A-10, her Warthog, felt out of place, a heavy-shouldered beast of the land, now chained to the sea. The yellow shirt, the aircraft director, guided her forward. A clank and thud resonated through the fuselage as the launch bar on her reinforced nose gear slotted into the catapult shuttle. She was locked in, committed. She went through the checklist, her movements economical, precise, throttles to full. The twin engines roared, a deep, guttural sound that was pure Warthog, a defiant cry against the high-pitched shriek of the Navy jets. She checked her control surfaces. She looked at the shooter, the catapult officer, standing on the deck, his form silhouetted against the gray sky. This was it. No simulation, no reset. Her heart was a cold, hard knot in her chest. Every land-based takeoff she had ever executed was a gradual negotiation with gravity. This was going to be a street fight. She gave the shooter her salute, a crisp, final gesture. He touched the deck. The world ended. It was not acceleration. It was a physical blow. A 2-second-long car crash. The slam of the catapult firing was a sound she felt in her teeth. Her head was thrown back against the headrest with bone-jarring force. The G's were a solid wall, crushing the air from her lungs. She couldn't breathe. Her vision compressed into a narrow gray tunnel. And the sound. The A-10 screamed. It was a high-pitched, tearing groan of metal under unbearable stress. The wings, designed to carry bombs and soak up gunfire, were being subjected to forces they were never meant to endure. The cockpit shuddered. Warning lights flickered like angry hornets. She's coming apart. The thought was pure, cold terror. The wings are ripping off. Her hand was frozen on the stick. She was no longer a pilot. She was cargo. She was a bullet being fired. Fly the plane. Fly the plane. The mantra was a silent scream in her skull. Then, silence. The violent pressure vanished. The screaming stopped. A sudden, shocking lightness. She was floating. The A-10 was airborne, nose high, wallowing in the air. For one terrifying second, she was falling. The ocean rushed up to meet her. Fly the plane. Her training, the real training, kicked in. She eased the stick forward, fighting the aircraft's desire to stall. The nose dipped. The wings caught the air. The gray tunnel of her vision snapped back into the full, blinding expanse of the sky. She was flying. She was alive. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely grip the controls. She took a gasping, ragged breath. It tasted like salt and her own fear. She checked her systems. The warning lights were gone. The airframe had held. The Warthog, ugly and stubborn, had taken the punch. Roosevelt, Warhorse 01 is airborne, she transmitted. Her voice was a strained, unrecognizable croak. The reply was the same flat, procedural tone of the LSO. Roger, Warhorse, launch. Proceed to holding pattern. She banked the A-10, the movement familiar, solid. Below her, the Roosevelt looked small again. She had done half the impossible. The plow horse had been thrown off the deck. Now she had to land it. Flying was the easy part. Landing was the horror. Maya was back in the holding pattern, her warthog feeling stable and true. But her target, the Roosevelt, was no longer a platform to launch from. It was a target to be hit. A moving, pitching rectangle of steel 100 feet wide. Warhorse 01, you are cleared for the trap. Call the ball, the LSO's voice said. The same flat calm. She wheeled the A-10 around, descending into the groove. Her hook was down. Her gear was down. Her flaps were set. The plane was dirty, and it flew like a brick. The A-10's engines, built for low-altitude endurance, not high-thrust agility, were slow to respond. Every correction had to be made seconds in advance. There was no powering out of a mistake at the last second. This was the test. The cat shot was violence done to her. This was violence she had to fly into perfectly. 3/4 of a mile. The deck rushed at her. The LSO, a tiny figure in green, stood on his platform. Warhorse, ball, she called, her voice a dry rasp. She had the meatball in sight, a glowing amber light. Her job was to keep it aligned with the green horizontal bar. Roger, ball. The burble hit her, just as before. The warthog wallowed, dipping a wing. Her instinct screamed. Her hands, damp with sweat, moved on the stick and throttle. A delicate, pre-calculated dance. She didn't fight the turbulence. She rode it, anticipating its next move. She was lined up. The angle of attack was perfect, but her land-based instincts were a physical sickness in her gut. Flare. Pull up, ease it down. That was how you landed a plane. But on a carrier, you flew the plane into the deck. Keep it coming, the LSO's voice chanted, a mantra against the roar of her engines. The deck was filling her canopy. It was too fast. She was going to crash. The urge to pull back on the stick was so strong it was a physical pain, a burning in her forearms. Trust the LSO, trust the ball. She kept the ball centered. She flew the warthog straight into the steel. The impact was staggering. The main gear struck the deck with a whump that seemed to shoot up her spine. The nose gear slammed down a millisecond later. For an instant, she was just a very fast, very heavy truck rolling on a ship. Then the hook caught. The screech of the arresting wire was the sound of physics being torn apart. The deceleration was the most violent thing she had ever felt. It was not a stop. It was an arrest. Her body was thrown forward, slammed against the 5-point harness so hard her vision went black at the edges. The straps dug into her shoulders and hips, the buckles biting into her. Her head snapped forward, saved only by the locked inertia reel. Dust and small debris from the cockpit floor floated in 0G for a split second. Then, silence. Total, absolute, deafening silence. She was stopped. The engines idled, their roar now a muted whine. The A-10, her warhorse, sat trembling on the angled deck, the 3-wire still taut behind it. She couldn't breathe. Her lungs, emptied by the G-force, refused to inflate. Breathe. She took a gasping, shuddering breath. It tasted like hot metal and ozone. Her hands were locked to the stick, white-knuckled, frozen in a death grip. She had to consciously unpeel her fingers, one by one. They ached. She looked out the canopy. The deck crew, the yellow shirts, were already moving, signaling for her to raise her hook. She had done it. She had landed a tank on a boat. She raised the hook. She taxied off the landing strip, her movements jerky, her body thrumming with an adrenaline dump so profound she felt sick. She had passed. She was, in the barest, most technical sense, a naval aviator. But as she shut down the engines, a deep, throbbing ache began in her collarbone, right where the harness had tried to cut her in two. The carrier's small medical bay smelled of rubbing alcohol and old coffee. Maya sat on the edge of an examination table, the paper crinkling beneath her. She was in her t-shirt, her flight suit pooled at her waist. "Breathe deep," said the flight surgeon, a Navy lieutenant commander with tired eyes. He pressed his stethoscope to her back. Maya inhaled. The movement sent a sharp, stabbing pain through her left shoulder and collarbone. She didn't wince. She kept her face neutral, her breathing even. "You took a hell of a hit, Captain," the doctor said, moving to her front. He gently prodded her shoulder. "The harness?" "Yes, Doc. I've seen F-18 pilots with fewer contusions after a hard trap. Your A-10 isn't built for this. You're not built for this." He wasn't being accusatory, just factual. "Any visual tunneling on the cat shot?" "Negative, Doc. Just the standard G pressure." A lie. The world had compressed to a pinprick of gray. "Headaches? Nausea?" "Negative." Another lie. A dull, metallic ache pulsed behind her eyes. He made a note on his chart. He looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "Look, Captain, what you're doing out there, it's brutal. The human body has limits. If you're pushing past G-lock, you're not just a risk to yourself. You're a risk to my deck crew." This was the real test. "I'm within parameters, Doc. It's a new G-profile. My body will adapt. I'm cleared to fly." Her voice was firm. It was an order, not a request. He held her gaze for a long moment, then sighed, signing the form. "You're cleared. But Hansen, get some rest, and use the ice. That bruising is significant." She nodded, pulled on her shirt. The fabric, soft cotton, felt like sandpaper against the raw, purple map of her success that spread from her shoulder to her collarbone. It was the price of adaptation. She walked back to the squadron ready room. It was empty, the air still and cold. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the sharp, throbbing pain. She dry-swallowed 2 ibuprofen from her flight suit pocket, her hands shaking almost imperceptibly. Pain is a signal. It is not a stop. The hatch hissed open. Commander Stagg entered. He didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room, a physical embodiment of the ship's authority. He held no clipboard, no coffee. He just watched her. "Captain." "Sir." She kept her hands still on the table, refusing to rub her aching shoulder. He didn't say, "Good flight." He didn't say, "Congratulations." "You were slow to react on your first wave off," he said. His voice was flat. "You let it get high. You were chasing the ball." "Yes, sir." The burble was stronger than the sim indicated. "I corrected on the second pass." "We don't get second passes in combat." He took a step closer. The pressure in the room ratcheted up. "Your hook fails to drop. You're on final. What's your procedure?" The pain was a white noise behind her eyes. She focused on his face. "Cycle the handle. If it fails, engage the emergency pneumatic release. If that fails, wave off, climb to altitude, and divert to the beach for a barrier landing. Your nose gear indicates unsafe after a cat shot. Keep the angle of attack low, gentle maneuvers. Execute a flyby for visual confirmation. If it's confirmed hung, divert. If it's a false positive, I land. You trap. The wire snaps. Full power, positive rate, raise gear, Eject if I don't clear the angle and the aircraft is uncontrollable. Her answers were immediate, recited from memory, but applied with the cold logic of her own experience. The pain was irrelevant. The knowledge was everything. Stagg stared at her. He wasn't testing her knowledge. He was testing her composure. He was checking for cracks. He was seeing if the physical toll had compromised the pilot. She didn't give him the satisfaction. She sat straight, meeting his gaze, the agony in her shoulder a secret fire she refused to acknowledge. Finally, he gave a single, curt nod. The next phase is night operations. Briefing at 1900, don't be late. He turned and left. The hatch hissed shut, sealing her back in the silence. Maya allowed her eyes to close for a single long second. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. She had passed. She was cleared. But the price was getting higher, and the true test was still waiting in the dark. Night was not just the absence of light. It was a physical presence. A suffocating black void. Maya was strapped into the Warthog, orbiting 5 miles from the Roosevelt. The ship was a black hole, running under emission control, showing only the faintest pinpricks of light necessary for navigation. The horizon was gone. The ocean was gone. There was no up or down. There was only the faint green glow of her instruments and the steady, artificial line of her attitude indicator. The pain in her shoulder had subsided to a deep, resonant ache, a cold counterpoint to the hot thrum of her engines. "Warhorse, cleared for approach!" The LSO's voice crackled, disembodied. "Call the ball." "Warhorse, Roger. Commencing approach." She banked the heavy jet, her eyes sweeping the panel. Airspeed, altitude, rate of descent. She was flying by numbers, not by feel. This was the ultimate test of faith. Trusting that the needles and lights in her cockpit corresponded to a 90,000-ton ship somewhere in the blackness. The darkness was a trigger. It was always night in her memories. The scree of radio static. The smell of her own fear, cold and metallic. "Warhorse, Raptor 3, we are being overrun?" She flinched. The sound was so clear, so loud in her helmet, she thought it was a real transmission. No, not now. "Fly the plane." She descended, fighting a sudden prickling sweat. The instruments seemed to float, their green glow too bright. 3/4 of a mile. She should see the meatball. There, a blurry amber light. "Warhorse, ball," she called. Her voice was too tight. "Roger, ball, keep it coming." The LSO's voice was her lifeline, but as she descended, the static in her helmet, it was talking. "Heavy contact. Danger close. God, no, there." "Warhorse, you're high," the LSO said. "Correcting," she murmured. But the instruments were blurring. The vertigo hit her like a physical blow. The artificial horizon line, her one anchor to reality, seemed to tilt. The whole panel swam. Was she upside down? Was she in a dive? The ghost of Kandahar was in the cockpit with her. "You're Winchester. You're useless." The blurry amber light of the meatball turned a searing, angry red. "Warhorse, you're low! Power! Power!" The LSO's voice was a scream. "Wave off! Wave off! Wave off!" The red wave-off lights on the carrier deck flashed, a screaming, silent alarm in the total darkness. The panic, the ghost, and the LSO's command all hit her at once. She was feet from the deck. A ramp strike. No, pure animal reflex. She jammed the throttles to the firewall. The engines roared, a desperate, wounded sound. She hauled back on the stick. The A-10, heavy and sluggish, wallowed. The steel ramp of the carrier flashed underneath her, close enough to touch. She was climbing, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. She was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor. She had almost killed herself. She had almost driven her warthog into the back of the ship. She was safe, airborne, but she had failed. The radio was silent for a long, agonizing minute as she climbed back to the holding altitude, her hands slick inside her gloves. Then, a new voice, cold as the ocean. Stag. Warhorse, RTB, return to base. She swallowed, the taste of bile in her mouth. Sir, I can take it around. I have this. Negative, Captain. Stag's voice was ice. You're done for the night. Divert to Naas. Now. The order was final. Grounded. She looked at the inky blackness, the void where the ship had been. The ghost was gone. But the failure was a new, heavier weight. She had just proven him right. She had been ferried back to the Roosevelt on a C-2 Greyhound, a passenger in her own flight suit. The walk from the flight deck to the CVIC was a walk of shame. The deck crew, busy securing aircraft against the rising wind, didn't look at her. They didn't need to. She was the Air Force pilot who couldn't hack a night landing. The CVIC, the Carrier Intelligence Center, was dark, lit by the ominous glow of radar screens. The air was pressurized, smelling of ozone and coffee. Stag stood in the center, his back to the hatch, staring at a large display. On it, a massive, swirling weather pattern dyed in angry reds and yellows was churning toward them. The storm has accelerated, Stag was saying to the operations team. Hurricane force winds expected within 18 hours. The test window is closed. Maya's blood ran cold. Closed. All flight operations will be suspended as of 1000 tomorrow, Stag continued, his voice clipping. That's not enough time to requalify Captain Hansen on night ops. We're scrubbing that portion of the test. It was a kill shot, the all-weather capability, the entire point of the project, the very reason she endured the pain and the simulator, was being scrubbed. Because of her. The team murmured their understanding and began to file out, their expressions grim. Maya did not move. Stag turned, saw her, and his face hardened. Captain, you're dismissed. Pack your gear. You'll be on the C-2 back to Mugu at 0800. Her confidence was a shattered thing. The ghost of Kandahar, the vertigo, the wave-off, they all swirled around her, a storm inside her matching the one on the screen. She was the weak link. No. Sir, she said. The word was quiet, but it stopped him. I said, you're dismissed. You can't scrub the night quals, sir. He took a step toward her, his impatience a palpable force. Captain, I can and I am. Your performance was compromised. You had vertigo. You almost ramp-struck my ship. I will not risk my deck, my crew, or a multi-million-dollar airframe because your nerves cracked. The words hit, sharp and accurate. Nerves cracked. She held his gaze. Her hands were steady at her sides. It was a mistake, sir. One mistake. One mistake is all it takes out here, Hansen. The weather is too tight. The test is over. You failed that gate. Don't ground the program, she said, her voice dropping, gaining an intensity that made him pause. Don't ground the mission, because I made one mistake. She stepped past him, looking at the radar. The all-weather day-night objective is the key performance parameter. Without it, the A-10 is a fair-weather toy. The entire project is a failure. My report, and yours, will have to state that the test was incomplete, terminated due to pilot failure. She made it a fact, not a plea. She wasn't asking for herself. She was reminding him of the mission. Your mission. Stag was silent. The only sound was the low hum of the radar. He was looking at her. Really looking at her. Not as a woman, not as an Air Force rookie, but as an officer who had just cornered him with his own objective. "You get vertigo again," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're not just risking yourself." "I won't, sir. It won't happen again." He looked at the radar, at the approaching red mass. He was calculating. "The storm is forecast to hit 1,000. You won't get a night requal, but the deck is open at 600. That gives you one slot. One launch, one trap. You pass that daylight cert, we sign the papers on the program. You fail, you're on that C2. Understood?" It wasn't what she wanted. It was a compromise. A daytime pass was not a night qual, but it was a pass. It would certify the program. "Understood, sir." "Good. Get some rest. You look like hell." He turned back to the screen. She was dismissed. She walked out of the CVIC, the cold, pressurized air giving way to the humid, windy corridor. She had a chance. One last chance. The A-10s maintenance chief was waiting for her, his face grim. "Captain," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk. We found something on the post-flight inspection of the other bird." The hangar bay was a cavern of yellow light and screaming wind. The storm was close, a palpable entity pressing against the ship's bulkheads. The Roosevelt was pitching, a slow, heavy roll that Maya felt in her stomach. Master Chief Petty Officer Tink Davies, the head of the maintenance detachment, met her by the nose gear of A-10 780599. This was the other warthog, the backup, not her plane. Tink was a career Navy man, his face a roadmap of long hours and hydraulic fluid. He didn't like this project. He didn't like what it was doing to his birds. "Captain," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. He didn't salute. He just pointed. He held a small, high-intensity UV light. He shone it on the attachment strut of the nose gear, right where the steel met the launch bar mechanism. "There." Maya knelt. The steel looked perfect to the naked eye. But under the UV light, a tiny, spiderweb-thin line glowed with faint chemical green. A hairline fracture. "Magnaflux particle test confirmed it," Tink said, switching off the light. The crack vanished. "It's material fatigue. That cat shot. It's like hitting a brick wall at 150 knots, over and over. This airframe wasn't built for it." Maya stood up, her blood running cold. This was not a minor issue. This was catastrophic. A nose gear collapse on a cat shot would send the A-10 cartwheeling into the island. A collapse on landing would be just as fatal. "It's done," Tink said. "This bird is grounded. Done." "What about my plane?" Maya asked. Her plane was number 780601, already on the flight deck, being prepped for the 0600 launch. Tink's expression was grim. "We've inspected it twice, top to bottom. And it's clean." Maya processed this. Clean, but for how long? Metal fatigue was a disease. It didn't strike just one. It was a symptom of a fundamental design flaw. The repeated stress was killing both planes. One had just shown the symptom first. "Captain," Tink said, his voice low, "I have to write this up. Per regulations, I have to recommend grounding the entire detachment pending a full structural analysis by NavAir. That's a 3-month process, minimum. Your project is done." This was the end. He was right. Reporting this crack was a death sentence for Project Mjolnir. All her pain, her fear, her one small victory on the wire, all of it, for nothing. She would be sent home, the program a failure, and the ghost of Kandahar would have its final victory. Unless... "You haven't written the report yet," she stated. It wasn't a question. Tink looked at her. "I'm writing it now, Captain. I'll have it filed by 0530. The clock was ticking. Her flight was at zone 600. "Your plane is clean, Captain," Tink said again, his voice carefully neutral. "As of its 0400 inspection, Navarre 601 is fully mission capable." He was giving her a window, a tiny 30-minute window between his legal obligation and her flight. He was telling her the plane was safe, officially, even as they both knew, unofficially, that it was a ticking bomb. "Thank you, Master Chief," she said. She left him in the hangar bay and walked out onto the flight deck. The ZO 500 pre-dawn was a chaos of gray, lashing rain and wind. The deck was heaving. Her A-10 sat chained to the deck, a dark, hulking shadow. She began her pre-flight inspection. She wasn't just checking fuel lines and control surfaces. She was searching for her own death. She ran her gloved fingers over the nose gear of her plane, feeling for the infinitesimal flaw she knew was waiting. She checked the rivets, the welds, the hydraulic lines. It was clean. The airframe was sound. She stood back. The wind tore at her flight suit. This was the gamble. She was betting her life that this plane had one more launch, one more trap left in it. She was betting that the crack on the other plane was a fluke and not a warning. It was a lie. She knew it was a lie, but it was the only one she had. She pulled the A-sheet, the pre-flight form, from its casing. The Sabah rain spattered on the plastic. She saw Tink's signature from 0400. FMC, fully mission capable. She took her pen. She signed her name beneath his. "I, Captain Maya Hansen, accept this aircraft." The ink was black, final. She climbed the ladder, the metal slick and cold. She was sealing herself inside a machine she knew was broken. The ZO 600 deck was a vision of controlled chaos. The sky was a bruised, yellowish gray, the wind howling, sending sheets of spray across the non-skid deck. The Roosevelt was pitching, the bow rising and falling in the heavy swell. Maya was locked into the catapult. Her warthog, chained and ready, felt like an extension of her own strained nerves. She ignored the part of her brain that was screaming about hairline fractures. She focused on the shooter. One more launch, one more trap. She pushed the throttles forward. The engines spooled, their roar a defiant challenge to the storm. She saluted. The slam of the catapult was just as brutal as the first time. The A-10 groaned, a sound of metal screaming in protest as it was hurled into the abusive, rain-filled sky. She was thrown back, her vision tunneling. The plane shuddered, fighting the G-force and the crosswind. But it held. She was airborne. "Warhorse 01 airborne," she grunted, her lungs fighting for air. "Commencing simulated KS run." "Roger, Warhorse," Stagg's voice replied, a disembodied presence from the CVIX. "Your target is the training coordinates. You are cleared hot. ROE is PID required, low collateral damage." For the next 20 minutes, she was not a test pilot. She was a warthog driver. She was home. She descended, the gray churning ocean a blur below her. The target coordinates appeared on her HUD. She ran the simulated attack, her hands and eyes moving in a practiced lethal ballet. Visual ID, lock target, Fox 2 simulated. "Good hits, Warhorse, good hits," the controller confirmed. "Return to Mother. You are cleared for your final trap. Godspeed." The final trap. She turned the A-10 back toward the Roosevelt. The storm was worse now, the deck pitching more violently. This was not a test. This was a barely controlled recovery. She dropped her hook. She dropped her gear. Thump. The nose gear locked. Thump. The starboard main gear locked. A high-pitched, steady whee sliced through the cockpit hum. Her eyes snapped to the panel. The indicator for the port main landing gear was red. The other two were green. Her blood went cold. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a fluke. The crack on the other plane was a warning. And hers had just failed. "Warhorse LSO, your port gear is red." The voice in her helmet was flat, professional, but the static hissed with new tension. She recycled the handle. She yanked it up, then slammed it back down. Nothing. The red light stared at her, mocking. A hollow thump vibrated through the airframe as the nose and starboard wheels locked into place. Nothing from the left. She was flying a compromised bird, a broken machine, in a storm, trying to land on a moving target. "Stag, Warhorse, I have a hung port gear." Commander Jaskowicz's voice cut in, sharp as broken glass. "Warhorse, Stag, divert to NAS. Eject if you have to. I repeat, you are not cleared to land. Do not attempt a landing." She looked at the fuel gauge. She looked at the deck. Divert, fail the program, eject. Confirm every doubt they ever had. Confirm the A-10 was a plow horse that didn't belong. Her gloved thumb rested on the mic switch. The ghost of Kandahar whispered in her ear. "You're Winchester. You're useless." She keyed the mic. "Copy, Stag." Her voice was calm. She left the switch open. "I'm coming home." Eject. The order was logical. Safe, acknowledged procedure. Stag was protecting his ship, his crew, and his asset. He was giving her the out. Eject. Save yourself. The voice of the Kandahar ghost was loud now, insistent. "You're Winchester. You're broken. Get out. Live." She looked at the angry red light. Ejecting was failure. It was admitting the A-10 was too weak. It was admitting she was too weak. It was letting the ghost win. It was telling the three names on that AAR report that their deaths had taught her nothing. He's wrong. The thought was not defiant. It was a cold, hard fact. The order was wrong. Her thumb keyed the mic. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the war in her head. "Stag, negative." The silence on the comms was a physical shock. Disobeying a direct order in an emergency over a command net. It was career suicide. A court-martial. "I have an idea," she continued, her voice clipping all business. "Warhorse is taking it around, going to try and shake it loose. Captain, I am ordering you." She clicked him off. She did not have time for his anger. She jammed the throttles forward, climbing away from the ship, the storm battering the Warthog. She needed altitude. She needed a plan. The manual procedure was useless. This was a structural failure. She couldn't force it with hydraulics. She had to beat it into submission. She remembered an old, unauthorized maneuver an instructor, a grizzled Vietnam vet, had told her about. The Warthog is a tractor. Sometimes you gotta kick the engine to make it start. She reached 5,000 feet, leveling off in the gray, turbulent soup. Her heart was a cold, steady drum. The ghost was silent, stunned by her audacity. "This is for you, boys." She took a deep breath. She pulled the stick back, hard, hauling the A-10 into a gut-wrenching climb, pushing the engines to their absolute limit. The airframe shuddered, protesting the maneuver. She climbed until the plane was almost vertical, the airspeed bleeding off rapidly. The stall warning horn blared. Stall, stall. The plane hung there for a heartbeat. A 30,000-pound machine suspended in the sky, all its energy gone. Now. She kicked the left rudder and shoved the stick hard forward and to the right. It was a violent, forbidden maneuver, a forced rudder reversal. The A-10, never built for aerobatics, snapped. It fell out of the sky, tumbling into a vicious, uncontrolled negative-G spin. Her body was lifted, thrown against the straps with sickening lightness. dust and debris from the cockpit floor. Pencil fragments, bits of paper, floated in the air around her. A chaotic zero-G cloud. The red gear light was the only fixed point in her spinning world. The negative G force was a nauseating, head-filling pressure. The plane was falling, spinning, coming apart. Kick the engine. She fought the spin, her inputs precise, counterintuitive. She centered the controls. The plane was in a 60-degree dive, screaming toward the ocean. Again. She pulled back, hard, then shoved the stick forward again, a violent bunt. The negative G pulse was even worse. Her head felt like it was splitting open. A sound. Not a warning tone. Not the wind. A deep, metallic thunk. A sound of metal on metal. A sound of release. She wrestled the A-10 out of the dive, her arms aching from the strain. The gray ocean was terrifyingly close. She leveled off, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at the panel. The red light was gone. 3 green. 3 beautiful, steady, impossible green lights. Her whole body was shaking. She was soaked in sweat. She keyed the mic, her voice a low rasp, but unbreakable. LSO Warhorse. On approach. A pause. The entire ship, the entire crew, had been listening. Roger, Warhorse. The LSO's voice came back, tight with a tension she had never heard. Call the ball. She turned the damaged, brutalized, magnificent Warthog back toward the ship. Now she just had to land it. The Warthog was a wounded animal. The maneuver had saved her, but she could feel the damage. The airframe felt loose, the controls sloppy. The storm raged, an indifferent monster. She was back in the groove, 1 mile out. The deck of the Roosevelt was a pitching, rain-slicked nightmare. It rose and fell, a 10-foot heave, disappearing into troughs of gray water. Warhorse ball, she called. Her voice was a rasp. Her hands, she noticed with a strange detachment, would not stop shaking. The adrenaline from the maneuver was a toxic flood, making her muscles twitch. Roger, ball. The LSO's voice was a lifeline, a single point of calm in the chaos. Keep it coming. Don't go low. 3 green lights. But were they true? Was the gear locked? Or was it just hanging, waiting to fold like paper the moment it touched steel? There was no way to know. You cannot be shaking, she told her hands. They ignored her. The tremor was too deep. Fine. Fly with the shake. Integrate it. She stopped fighting her body. She stopped fighting the storm. She let the Warthog, the wind, and her own trembling nerves become one system. Her focus narrowed, blotting out the fear, the court-martial, the ghost of Kandahar. There was only the deck, the green lights, and the meatball. The ship rose up to meet her. The LSO was silent. This was her pass. The deck filled the canopy. The urge to pull up, to save the damaged gear from the impact, was overwhelming. Fly the plane into the deck. She held the approach. Perfect. The impact was a cataclysm. The main gears struck the steel simultaneously. A whump that shot up her spine. The hook snagged the 3-wire. The screech of the cable was the sound of salvation. The plane was thrown forward, slamming her into her harness. And the port gear. A sound, not of metal holding, but of metal dying. A high-pitched, tearing scream of tortured steel. The left wing dipped violently. The plane yawed, skidding sideways on the wet deck, the tire smoking. The gear was collapsing. It was folding. No, but it stopped. It held. It held at the last possible moment. Bent, twisted, but not broken. The plane slammed to a final shuddering halt, crooked on the angled deck, trailing smoke. Silence. Total. absolute. The sound of the wind, the sound of the rain lashing the canopy, the sound of her own ragged breathing. She was stopped. She was alive. Her hands were frozen. She could not unclench them from the stick. She stared at the gray, streaming sky, her body vibrating with the aftershock. The canopy wasn't opening, the power was fluctuating. She saw the deck crew, the yellow shirts, frozen in place, staring at her, at the smoking, mangled landing gear. They were waiting for the clear. She fumbled for the engine cutoff switches. Her fingers were numb, disobedient. She pulled them, one by one. The deep, guttural roar of the TF-34 engines began to spool down, replaced by a high-pitched, dying whine. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound. She had done it. She had brought the broken bird home. A yellow shirt was moving now, running toward her, signaling. She reached up, her arm feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She grabbed the canopy jettison handle. No, the manual release. She pulled. The seals hissed. The canopy unlocked. She pushed it open. The cold, salt-laced rain hit her face. It was real. It was the most real thing she had ever felt. The cold rain on her face was a shock, pulling her back from the edge. Maya sat in the cockpit, the world a blurry, muted thing. The thump of boots on the deck was the first sound to register, followed by the urgent, muffled shouts of the deck crew. "Captain, you good?" A crewman in a red crash and salvage helmet was at her wing, his face a mask of professional concern. She gave him a weak thumbs up. Her glove felt like it was filled with wet sand. She unstrapped, her movements clumsy, her body a single, deep, resonating ache. The harness, which had saved her life, had also branded her. The bruise from the first landing was now a raw, fiery map of new pain. She swung her legs over the cockpit, combing. Her boots hit the ladder. Each step down was a conscious, deliberate act of will. Her knees were jelly, shaking from the adrenaline crash. When her feet touched the non-skid deck, her legs almost buckled. She gripped the ladder, steadying herself. The deck was a chaos of activity. The maintenance crews were already swarming the A-10, pointing at the mangled port gear, at the smoking tire, their expressions a mixture of awe and horror. They were treating her plane not as a failure, but as a survivor. She turned. He was there. Commander Stagg. He stood 10 yards away, clear of the crash crew, a solid, unmoving figure in the swirling wind and rain. His khaki cover was pulled low, his face shadowed. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't motioning for the Marines to arrest her. He was just watching. Maya's stomach tightened. This was it. The court-martial. The end of her career. She had disobeyed a direct order. She had risked his ship. She took a breath, the cold, wet air stinging her lungs. She would not make excuses. She would not plead. She would take what was coming. She began the long walk toward him. Each step was heavy, a march toward her execution. The deck crew parted for her, their faces unreadable. She stopped a few feet in front of him. She was too tired to stand at perfect attention, but she stood as straight as her trembling body would allow. She looked him in the eye. Stagg's face was unreadable. He looked past her, at the crippled warthog, its wing dipped, its port gear a twisted ruin of steel. He looked at the 3-wire, still taut, that had caught her. Then his eyes moved back to her. He saw the exhaustion. He saw the soak of sweat and rain. He saw the tremor in her hands. He saw the pilot who had refused to fail. He said nothing. The wind howled between them, a low, mournful sound. He just nodded. Once. A single, short, curt dip of his chin. It was not forgiveness. It was not praise. It was not a pardon. It was respect. It was an acknowledgement. A silent mutual understanding between two professionals, bought with iron and paid for in adrenaline. It was the Navy man, the F-18 driver, the master of the boat, telling the Air Force rookie, the Warthog driver, "You belong." It was enough. It was everything. Maya held his gaze for one more second, then gave a nod of her own, just as brief. She walked past him, toward the island, toward the hatch. She didn't look back. The rain was washing the sweat from her face. She had proved them wrong. She had proved the ghost wrong. The rookies and their warthogs had a new home. The ready room was silent, a sterile pocket of stillness deep inside the carrier. The ship's slow, heavy roll was the only movement, a constant groaning reminder of the storm they were now running from. Maya sat heavily in a chair, still in her damp t-shirt, her flight suit peeled down to her waist. A medical corpsman had already come and gone, his face tight as he catalogued the spiderweb of new bruises on her collarbone, a violent purple-black map overlaid on the old yellowing ones. He had given her ibuprofen, a bottle of water, and an order to rest. Her hands, she noted, were finally steady. But a deep, cellular tremor remained, a vibration in her bones from the violence of the maneuver and the impact of the landing. She was no longer a pilot. She was just a collection of aches. The hatch hissed open. Stagg entered, ducking his head. He held a datapad. The storm's fury was a muted roar, a distant beast held at bay by the bulkhead. He looked at her, his expression just as flat and unreadable as it had been on the flight deck. He pulled up a chair and sat opposite her, the small table between them. He said nothing for a long moment, just studied her, as if reevaluating a complex equation that had suddenly, impossibly, solved itself. "You're grounded pending a full inquiry," he stated. His voice was flat. "You disobeyed a direct, lawful order from a superior officer. You endangered this vessel. You flew a non-standard, unapproved maneuver that could have torn your airframe apart. By every article in the UCMJ, you should be under guard." Maya met his gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't offer an excuse. She just nodded, accepting the words. "Yes, sir." He looked down at the datapad. Master Chief Davies's report on lower ZO 599, the other plane, was filed at ZO 530. You signed the A-sheet for lower ZO 601 at 0510. You flew a plane you knew was a statistical time bomb. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He knew. "The plane was signed off as clean, Commander. I flew a clean plane," she said, her voice quiet, without defiance. "You flew a lie, O Captain. A lie you were willing to bet your life on." He tossed the datapad onto the table. It slid across and stopped in front of her. On the screen was a single-page document. Project Mjolnir. Preliminary certification. At the bottom, 2 lines. One was for her. The other, already signed, was J.R. Jaskowitz, CDR, USN, program lead. Below that, in the comments section, he had typed one line. All performance parameters met. Aircraft and pilot demonstrated full mission capability, including contingency operations under extreme weather and battle damage equivalent conditions. He had signed it. He had lied for her. Or rather, he had told a more profound, more essential truth. "The inquiry," he said, tapping the screen, "will find that your primary radio malfunctioned due to storm static, that you misheard my order to divert as revert, and that your non-standard maneuver was a last-ditch, creative effort to save a critical test asset. Your telemetry data on forcing the gear, it's already on its way to Navarre. It seems you've invented a new emergency procedure." Maya stared at the signature. The cost of her insubordination wasn't a court-martial. It was this: a quiet, professional conspiracy, a shared, unspoken truth that would be buried in a file cabinet. "You're a hell of a pilot, Hansen," Stagg said, his voice dropping, losing its hard edge. "You're also a reckless, insubordinate pain in my ass. But you didn't fail. You didn't quit. And you didn't let the mission fail." He stood up. "The A-10 is certified for carrier ops. The rookies proved them wrong. That's the story. That's the only story." "And the inquiry, sir?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Is a formality. Your fortitude, it's quiet. I'm not used to that." He paused at the hatch, looking back. "But it's effective. Get some sleep. You've earned it." He was gone. Maya was left alone in the quiet room, the ship creaking around her. She looked at the signed certification. It was just a digital form. It held no glory. There would be no medals, no ceremony. Her victory was this: the silence, the deep ache in her bones, and the knowledge that the ghosts of Kandahar were finally, truly quiet. She had faced an impossible choice, a broken machine, and her own profoundest fears, and she had not been found Winchester. She had been found enough. She picked up the water bottle, her hand bruised but steady, and drank. The water was cold. It was real. And in the dark, humming quiet of the deep ocean, it was all the victory she would ever need.